Thank you for the opportunity, CESA YPF. I see a lot of my colleagues and staff on the call. Thank you for the support. Yeah, I'll have to bring my A game because they will grill me afterwards if I don't. So yeah, let's get into it. The topic I was asked to speak about is futuristic management. And I thought, while management covers many fields, by far the most misunderstood and challenging is managing people. And when I reflect on all my mentors and managers above me, I wouldn't do justice not to recognize our outgoing CEO, Costas Frontieres. Some of the guys on the call would have met him. And I think that's the sort of manager we should aspire to. If I reflect when I started 20 years ago in my career, it was a case of you didn't address any directors or managers by their name. It was yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And we've evolved and are continuously evolving in that where as much as Costas was a CEO that challenged us as managers, he was also very accessible, which was not the norm a few generations ago. So this is the outline that the brief I was given to speak today, just to cover some of the background of management, the role of management, the toolbox, theoretical versus experiential skills, especially when you're starting in your career. I was asked to speak about managing millennials. I think we moved on a bit from there. I think we're on generation alpha now. So just my thoughts on how we adapt and manage different generations, some common management pitfalls, ethical leadership and politics. I won't speak too much about it. I think Simone, I won't steal too much from her presentation. And then some typical management situations and challenges, managing in the new normal and the future of management, which is really what we're here to discuss today. Just a bit about me, I won't dwell on that. Just to say, if your future is not determined by where you started, just a bit of my background, grew up in a very poor household, living in backyard outbuildings, went to a government school, so very little opportunity starting out, but if I can make it, anybody can. Yeah, so on the first aspect, the role of management, and there's the theory of planning, organizing, leading, controlling. That's pretty well documenting. But I think what's often neglected is we're here to accomplish a goal. And as managers, we often get stuck into the day-to-day operational aspects of what we're doing and losing sight of our goal. And something that I drive in the people that I manage in our organization is SMART goals. It's been publicized, but I find over and over again, managers struggle in defining goals in terms of this philosophy. My advice would be that really starts with the end in mind, starts with what success would look like to you. And often the metrics is where we fall down. It's having clear understanding of how we're going to measure progress in the interim and ultimately when we believe we've achieved our goals. And just to quote our ex-dean at Gibbs, it's hard to run a business. Sometimes there may be naivety that we're good at what we do, we want to be managers, but it's hard. It's a completely different set of skills, which I'll touch on later. Just a bit of humor. This, in fact, is a very old article from 1999. And common mistakes, especially when managers start out in their career. I'd encourage you to go and find this article. It's called Who's Got the Monkey? And it deals with people, especially when you become a manager and you want to take on more responsibility, just be careful how you manage that responsibility and how that aligns with what your KPIs are versus what other people's KPIs are. Then I was asked to touch on the management toolbox. and I'll quote what we were told when we started in our business studies. The whole objective of business studies is to give you an inch deep and a mile wide, which means we try to understand what we don't know. We are trying to understand what tools are out there. And just some of the core competencies, which are very different to our technical and engineering competencies. Financial management, microeconomics, human behavior is a huge area. Human resources, macroeconomics, operations, marketing, business communication. Each one of those is a full course on its own. And I'd encourage you as young professionals starting out to start exposing yourself to some of the theory, the tools, the thinking around those areas. And then also by extension, the legal framework, which I'm encouraged that Simone is on board. When I started out, it wasn't seen as an important function in consulting engineering environment, but it's become critical to our business. And then corporate finance, more appropriate for larger firms in terms of mergers and acquisitions, forecasting, and innovation is becoming a big driver. And there's a whole school of thoughts around that, around strategy. I'll touch on the business environment later, and then decision making and many, many other skills and new theoretical frameworks that are coming on. So this is a massive toolbox. So I thought, okay, what can I leave with you that's practical and accessible now? Some of the tools I found very useful is a site called Strategizer. They initially started out with what they call a business model canvas, which is the second image below Strategizer. And that basically gives you a framework to map out your business. Often we're very limited in thinking about business, especially those of you who either started small businesses or are thinking about starting small businesses. I'll encourage you to look at their framework. A lot of the material is free. You can purchase their books, but you can source a lot of helpful information from them. And just on that, I'd encourage you to, if you're thinking about or have a business, map out your business, throw it in the bin, look at it from a totally different business model or way of doing business. Do that a few times before you start getting a true sense of what's the levers that operate your business. Secondly, the forerunner in South Africa, who's world-renowned, Clem Santa, started the thinking around scenario development, and I think that's very apt and appropriate for where we are, not just as a country, in the global environment and the level of uncertainty. And again, that's a session I'm happy to assist with at some later stage. That's a full-on session just around scenario development and planning. But for information, I encourage you, there is a website for scenario planning hosted by Clem Santa, to go and have a look at that. And then, yeah, podcasts have become a big part of my learning and development in terms of understanding what's happening in our markets. Avid follower of the Money Show and JC Direct. While we're not economists, it gives you a good sense of what is. And just in the last podcast or two, a lot of focus on what's happening in the built environment and the early indications that there is a recovery happening. PPC cements, as an example, is showing a 16 to 25% increase in revenue. So that's some positive news. Then I was asked to touch on what's more important, theoretical versus experiential development. And it's well documented that we retain only 10% of what we read and 75% of what we do. Now, my advice would be, and my experience is that both are equally important. You can't do and you can't experiment and you can't teach others if you don't know what you don't know. So reading is good. Reading exposes your mind to new ideas and new theories that you may not have been aware of. but don't stop there. I would encourage you to read and learn a new idea or topic or framework, and then try it out, experiment, document what you've learned, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And over time, you'll build your own toolbox and theories that work for you. Then in terms of intergenerational management, first and foremost for me is trust. It's spending the time with your colleagues, with your managers, with your subordinates to build that trust. In the fast-paced and pressured environments, which will increasingly be so in the built environments and in consulting engineering, it's becoming more and more difficult, I'm finding. But we've got to make the time to meet each other face-to-face or online, not via emails. Emails have replaced a lot of the communication skills. It's cold, it's informal, and it's subject to a lot of ambiguity and unnecessary conflict. And then one of the aspects that's coming through is work-life balance integration. When I reflect again, when I started out, you were just expected to work. I don't think that's sustainable or that's the correct way of working. But work-life balance is important for all of us. If you don't look after yourself as a manager, you're going to run out of steam, guaranteed. You're going to burn out. And then the consequences are much harsher than if you spend some time looking after yourself. More so, it's about partnering internally in your business and in your organization, but more so externally. And I'll touch on that a bit later as well. For older managers that are on the, or more experienced managers that are on the call, newer generations coming through want the growth opportunities. They want the recognition, they want coaching and insist on it. They want regular feedback. And above all, they want to understand what's the purpose of our existence as an organization and in terms of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Just some management pitfalls. Communication, as I touched on previously, is vital to managing people in particular. I find, especially amongst engineers, we are generally introverted as a species, and we avoid conflicts, but it's unavoidable. You can avoid it in the short term, but inevitably it's going to catch up with you. So best to deal with it constructively and directly as soon as possible. And then also we've had incidences in particular around COVID-19 lockdown, staff trying to manage working from home with all the demands on their time, and the challenges around that is a lack of empathy. While we still got to deliver as a business, it helps to get your staff motivated if you can show understanding and be empathetic to their situation. Again, in the fast-paced environments with limited revenue, a lot of discounting, there's less and less time available for mentoring. But somehow we've got to manage and find the time and block that out to invest in our staff, invest in their development. Then more on the practical side, planning, a lot of, on the project management side, a lot of the failures and cost overruns and lack of strategic direction and execution is around planning. I touched on previously, and I'll go in a bit more detail, our business environments, being unaware of what's going on around us, lack of developing social capital in terms of building your network, and then last and most importantly is culture. What kind of culture are we building? Have we got a value systems that yourself and your team have bought into? Are you reinforcing those values and in turn reinforcing your culture on a day-to-day basis? I won't go too deep in terms of ethics because Simone will touch on that. But again, have you got a clear value system as a business that may not always align with your personal value system, but you've got to have a core value system, whether it's a big business or a small business, that drives decisions and drives accountability in your business. And I was also touch on some of the personal experiences in terms of ethics, corruption. And sadly, this started, examples go back right to when I started as a student technician, where contractors would blatantly offer you to buy you a car if you just sign on that. I would encourage you not to fall for that trap. I've had to deal with staff that have done so, and it's a short term, you're basically selling out your future for a streetwise tool in that case. And signing off on things which are inevitably uncovered, and then your career has always got that black mark against your name. So don't do it. It's a short answer. Again, the sad reality, we had this discussion in our MBA class, and a lot of the classmates work not just in South Africa, but throughout Africa. And at least 50% of the class found or felt that sending brown envelopes under the table was a way of doing business. So we have a deep-seated culture of corruption and lack of accountability as a society, not just in South Africa, but throughout Africa. It does affect us all. It doesn't affect us in this generation. It affects future generations and our kids. And it's not a sustainable way of doing business. So many, many challenges if you haven't become a manager, not in that role, that you'll face. And I've listed them. I won't read through all of them because of time. But I think it starts with self-management. We speak about time management, but it's more about self-management. Understanding what's your priorities as individually and as a business unit and as a business, and focusing on that. There'll be a lot of noise, a lot of distraction, a lot of challenges that you need to deal with. But if you start with managing yourself, many of these things will fall into place. So we talk about managing in the new normal, but in fact, a lot of commentators have said it's not normal. What has happened in 2020 is far from normal. It's more like a new reality. And as such, as a new reality, we've got to take a very different, we've got to move away from business as usual and take a very different stance on how we deal with how we move forward and the decisions we make. We speak about VUCA, which is a volatile, uncertain, chaotic, ambiguous business environment, and it's just gotten worse. We talk about mental well-being, and we've seen through the stats from our medical providers that we've seen at least a 20-25% increase in cases of people having anxiety, depression, and other stress-related mental illnesses. So as managers coming through, you cannot be oblivious to that. You've got to take it very seriously. It's a hidden disease, and you've got to put measures and support systems in place for your staff, because it will affect your bottom line, maybe not in the short term, but definitely at some stage in the future. Working from home will become normal, and it's already become normal, and I think that's going to persist and continue into the future. With that becomes even more challenging to manage people and managing them face to face. So I'd encourage you as new managers, those of you that are new managers or becoming new managers, to touch base with your staff regularly and develop a system and a network of not just you checking with your staff, but them checking in with each other, and encourage those coffee chats, those water cooler chats, not about business. I think we, or myself, experienced a flood of Zoom meetings and Teams meetings, and your day was just full during lockdown with meetings with very little time to take a breath and touch base with your people. Setting boundaries. While you as a manager will be under pressure, you've got to set boundaries for your staff as well. Being available 24/7, it's not going to be good for anybody. Then you hear the terms of, as business, we need to pivot. It's a buzzword amongst business literature. I'd caution you about just jumping completely outside of your comfort zone as a manager. Rather look at what's the core skills and the core offerings you can offer your clients, but how can you do that in a different way, a different communication channel? And then in terms of legislative formats, it's going to impact your business. So I'd encourage you to get a good understanding of PFMA, MFMA, and the many procurement and legislative processes, labor acts, etc., that govern us. We can't be disconnected as engineers from the legal framework that we need to operate within. Then this is my last slide. Where are we going in future? Like I touched on, we've got to be very aware of our business environment. There's a very well-documented theory around whether we operate as foxes or whether we operate as hedgehogs. And the simple analogy is a fox is continuously scanning his environment or her environments, looking for opportunities, looking for threats, as the animal does, and is knowledgeable in many things. I think traditionally as engineers, we focus on one thing that we're good at, one discipline, one type of business model. My view, or my personal view, is we run a major risk if we carry on doing business as usual as engineers in South Africa. The slide in the middle is a McKinsey slide called a 3-horizon model that's was published quite a while back, but I believe still relevant today. And it talks about spending 60 to 70% of your capacity on what you're good at now, 20 to 30% on what new opportunities that are still within your skill set, but again, like I said in the previous slide, slightly outside of business as usual. And the third horizon, where you spend 5 to 10% of your budget and effort and time, is completely blue sky opportunities. And again, the most value typically on the value scale on the left would be on your blue sky opportunities. But on the time scale, that's downstream in 5 to 10 years plus. But successful businesses and successful managers don't just focus on the immediate environment or skill set that they are good at, but continuously look at what opportunities are downstream and how can we develop the skills early enough to take advantage of those opportunities. And then we speak about agility. And agility talks to not just your agility as an organization and your business model and your current structures and whether that constrains your agility as a business or an organization. It talks to your agility as a person. And I find engineers, and myself included, will struggle with this because we train to be systems thinkers, to work within constraints, to work in a very structured approach. So one of the core disciplines or core skill sets we're going to have to develop, and soon, is our ability to be more creative, to look more outside of our training and development and look at how do we do things in a new, more efficient, better way. It ties back to innovation, it ties back to technology. On the innovation and technology side, you may have read about how Africa can leapfrog the lack of development through innovation and technology, and we're starting to see signs of that happening throughout the continent. And we must ensure that as South Africans and consulting engineers South Africa, we are not left behind. I touched on business models and what is the next consulting engineering firm going to look like in 50 years' time? We don't know. That's the short answer. But we can start thinking, and the challenge I put out to some of my peers is, how do we do to start to stimulate thinking? How do we do what we do for half of the price of what we do? Because that's where the industry is going, unfortunately. While we'll strive to address massive discounting and the negative effects that has on our industry and the lack of attracting the best talent and skills development budgets to be available. I think there is a place for thinking outside of the box, thinking in terms of how do we develop an ecosystem, for example, that takes a student from year one and plugs them into an ecosystem that's supported by government, public sector, educational institutions, and corporates in South Africa. And how do we grow that students as rapidly as we can through the learning and development stage and continuous adult education and development post-graduation into access to opportunities in the individual capacity, into access of learning and development of how to set up SMEs in the consulting space. How do we do all this virtually now? And how do we address the real constraints in terms of data access to allow all of this ecosystem to operate? How do we plug mentors into this ecosystem so that we get individuals to thrive technically and also as small businesses, which we sorely need as a country? And as I touched on, we can't escape our legislative framework. I won't elaborate there more. We have touched on understanding, in particular, PFMA and MFMA, which I've had clients, senior director level clients, say to me, that's not our problem. That's Treasury must deal with that, or the finance department. It's all of us are legislated in the consulting engineering environment, private sector and business clients. Sorry, not private sector, business, public sector, and us as consulting engineers are legislated and controlled and have to abide by that framework. And just lastly, we often neglect as engineers interpersonal relationships and networking side of what we do. I'd encourage you now with tools like LinkedIn, with voluntary associations like CESA and Imbizo and others, get involved. I think as a country, the way we're going to move forward is to be much more an active citizenry, to stop complaining, to stop looking at the negative, to look for the positive stories, to get to know your ward councillors and your political structures and your municipal structures and make them accountable. Hold them accountable to the promises they make during elections and become part of the solution. We can't sit back and keep complaining and immigrating without fixing our own problems. And then just, yeah, we've obviously got our work cut out for us as South Africans. But what I would encourage you is to look at examples of where people have overcome. And some of the examples I can think back of is Quali Health. Dr. Ntabo Singh was a medical doctor, qualified, and went and did an MBA, and then thought how could she use both the medical experience as well as her managerial now and business management experience. And she looked at deep slurts in Gauteng, saw that in a population of anywhere between 500 and 800,000 people, there were no private medical facilities that fitted in beneath your private hospitals and government hospitals. And it's a beautiful story. I'd encourage you again to go and look at that case study. And when you go to Quali Health, it's a world-class private clinic. It's all completely paperless. Somebody greets you at the door and welcomes you and ushers you to a seat. You are captured on the system, as I said, without any paperwork. You are then ushered to a doctor who sees to you, and generally doctors, like most GPs, will spend 5 to 10 minutes with you. But where they see massive value is community trained workers who then discuss with you and make sure that your clients understand what your ailments were. And they were finding that they closed the loop in terms of what clients would tell doctors, which were often intimidating. You get much more information and better case information from the community workers that are trained that sees the clients. And then they give them medicine and they exit. So here's the beauty of it. If you look at that, it's a massive positive impact on the community of Diepsloot. It's a massive social upliftment and job creation initiative. But for the angel investors that got involved and took a chance, typically taking a gamble on high risk investments would often see a return period of 3 to 5 years. The amazing story of Quali Health was they saw a return on investments in 8 months. So there's many, many more examples of where South Africans have seen the challenges, applied their minds and their knowledge, and come up with not just a good business model, but a model that addresses our needs as a society. That's it from me. I'll stop sharing and give it back to the presenter. And I hope that was beneficial to you.